Okay. Good afternoon, or I think it's actually good morning for you, isn't it?
It's morning here in my toilet in New York, yes.
Well, good morning, Mark. This is Mark Rylance, and Mark is in his toilet in a New York hotel. From what, and there's a view. That's his beautiful view outside.
That's my view, yeah.
Well, you're on the ground floor. That's something.
No, I'm actually on the roof.
Oh, you're on the roof. Oh, wow. Nice, nice. So you got a really good view out there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
Yeah, yeah, lucky me.
So, Mark, the reason we're talking today is because you had quite an extensive, from what I understand, quite an extensive relationship with Mike Alfreds over the course of quite a number of years. I mean, from what I've gathered, kind of from when you were, a very young actor, is that right?
Yeah, I think age 20 or 21 is the first time that I was aware of the work of shared experience.
Ah.
And yeah, and then just really pursued Mike, everything he did from that time on.
Do you have any memory of the first shared experience production you saw?
Yes, I think it was I think it was the Seagull at the Almeida. So I'd missed some of the very wonderful stuff earlier on. I was at drama school from 77, wait, no, 78 through 80. And then I got my first job at the Citizens Theatre for a year. So I was out of London for a year. And then when I came back um, down into London, uh, that was when I first saw the work of shared experience. And indeed, one of my first jobs in London was to do Genet's The Maids with Claire, who was doing the voice for shared experience. And she directed The Maids, but John Dix and Rod Rowe, two of the founding actors of the company, if I can call them that, played the two maids, and I played Madame. So I was brought into the company at that time for a little bit, but not working directly with Mike, but very aware of his techniques through John and Rod, and very fascinated by them. And the Seagull remains one of my top five, top 10 experiences of my life in the theatre.
Ah.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen a production to match it. Um,
Oh, that's really interesting. Can I? That was that the Pam Ferris one? Was Pam? No, it wasn't Pam. No, that was Cherry Orchard. It was Philip Osmond as the young man.
Yes, that's right. And maybe he was by that time adapting and working with Mike on the words of the whole thing. Because of course he went on to write wonderful plays for Mike, and which I enjoyed very much. So I was never in one of them, but I did in my summer holidays.
That's
It was
right.
a fantastic play down at the old drill center off Goode Street, and another one that Peter White was in about a funeral, about
Buried alive.
Buried Alive, yeah. Beautiful, detailed work. But yes, Philip was playing Constantine,
That's
and a number of all the players were just fantastic in the Seagull. But the liveliness of it, the life on the stage, and the free play and everything was completely what I was looking for, and the antidote to some of the more predominant styles of theatre at that time when I was entering the profession.
It's so interesting because that idea of something staying with you for so long. Because my first encounter was science fictions at the ICA,
Wow.
and I didn't know anything. I didn't know who Shared Experience was, and I just remember laughing from the beginning to the end. It was, but Rad afterwards said, you came on a good night. It didn't. It wasn't always funny. And then I went up to Sheffield to do a show there, and they were doing Cymbeline, which of course we'll get on to because you connected with them with Mike on the Globe. But again, that was a production that I will never forget. And
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, it was just like the most clear vision of a piece of theatre, and it's storytelling,
yeah.
wonderful storytelling.
Yeah, he made such a profound study of the elements of and the essential ingredients of storytelling, didn't he? With his wonderful inventions of how to move between first, second, and third person narration, yeah, forward energy in a story. Yeah, marvelous study Mike made of all those different things. I wish I'd caught hold of them earlier. I should have been able to go. It's funny I didn't become aware of them during drama school. Maybe they were touring a lot. But I wish I'd seen those earlier productions, which of course led to Trevor Nunn, you know, being inspired. I was going to say nicking ideas from Mike, which is probably the truth, but certainly was inspired by Bleak House, I believe, and went on to make Nicholas Nickleby. Because I understand he came a number of times to Bleak House to observe it and study it. So that was
Yeah.
I wish I'd seen some of those works too, science fictions. Yes, and the original Arabian Nights and things like
Yes,
that.
which I didn't see. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And Peter Brook came to the original Arabian Nights apparently and was going, I wish I could do stuff like this, or I would love to be able to do stuff, or I'm going to do stuff like this, you know.
yes, yes. Well, to me, I think, Mike, I often feel like Mike, to me, was the Peter Brook of my time as a growing actor. He certainly in terms of rehearsals and how you create a play, no one's matched his painstaking care and depth of rehearsal and depth of time in rehearsal too. Um, yeah.
So Mark, let me just ask you then. So you did this sort of tangential play, The Maids, and then when did you actually kind of get to work with Mike in person? Was it at the National?
Um, yeah, it was national. Yeah. I was really much more interested in what was happening in with shared experience in the fringe companies, but I got offered a line of parts at the RSC in 1982, beginning of 1982, and it was such good parts. I took the season, though I wasn't particularly interested in the work of the RSC at that time. It didn't seem to be as cutting edge as what Mike and other people were doing, but the season was an extraordinary season, and it was great for me to work with people like Bob Peck and Derek Jacobi, all kinds of Peter Postlethwaite, Alan Armstrong. It was a wonderful, strong season, and when I came out of it, though, I did have a feeling that it was a director-led theatre. There wasn't the same creativity for the actors in the rehearsal room. And once you'd created the production, the directors never came back again. And it was quite painful to try and sustain a locked production for 2 years, albeit in rep. So, I mean, I found it wasn't giving me the creative involvement of play that I had come into the theatre for as a very, very young person. Um, really, really as someone who liked to spend my time pretending I was other people than who I am, and in fantasy situations. I'd done that from as early as consciousness as I can remember. And so the profession wasn't really offering that buzz. It took me a while, it took me to my 30s to realize that that's why I was an actor, for the love of play, and that all the other things really didn't satisfy anywhere near that kind of drug of having long play. And the Maids, even though it wasn't with Mike, was the first time that I worked with people who would improvise for 4 hours or so, 2, 3, 4 hours. We would stay in character, just making stuff up and going into the strangest places, just in a church hall, so that when you came out of the improvs, it was like wakening from a deep, deep dream back into the reality. And it was so satisfying and fulfilling, not necessarily very interesting for an audience, but it meant when we came on stage to play the play itself, we had such a depth and richness of world around us. And it was very, very, and the whole encouragement of free play and free creation in front of the audience was just so pleasing and satisfying to me, compared to some of the more presentational skills I was being asked to deploy and use in more mainstream productions. So I came out of the RSC and tried to form did form a small cooperative theatre company to try working without a director. It felt like what the punks had done in the rock business, breaking down those big bands like Pink Floyd and the Stones and all these bands that had grown out of the 60s and 70s, a bit like the RSC had grown out of the 60s and 70s and become a big production house. And the early days of Michel Saint-Denis and people who were closer to Mike had faded way into the past for the RSC. It felt like in the theatre at that time in the early 80s, a number of us, Deborah Warner, McBurney, Cheek by Jowl, me not so successfully with the London Theatre of Imagination, we all wanted to make theatre in a simpler way, go back to the garage, so to speak, and a simple recorder as the punks had done. And Mike was just a leading light in that world. David Glass, too, I suppose, came out of that world, and the return of some very simple theatrical storytelling skills from Lecoq and from the French studios. But Mike was the closest I felt in England to that kind of learning of how to really develop your voice and your body and your imagination to its fullest extent, to be present and conveying a story in very simple and lively ways. So I've been meeting with him a number of times during the early 80s, 84, 85, to form this company and figure out what it should be about. But it wasn't, you're correct, it wasn't until 1987 that he called me with the offer to come and play at the National in that season of the Golden Ass. No, the Wandering Jew, Country Mania, and a third play by Nick Drake, I believe, which we were Peter Hall sacked me before I got to that third play.
I've heard Mike's talked fantastically and interestingly about that missing third play. And it's good that you've come up with a name, because he, at the time that we were talking, and I haven't researched it, it was Nick Drake. But he couldn't remember who. He said it was a young new playwright.
Nick Drake is the pop singer, isn't he? He's yeah. So I think I've got the wrong name. I mean, unless they have the same name.
Oh,
I may have forgotten exactly who the play was, because obviously it wasn't a very happy memory, that the whole thing. It was a very, very saturnine time, and I mean that in a positive way, not devilish way. But there was a lot of death going on for Mike. I think the death of shared experience, and I think even so, also perhaps the death of a certain expectation perhaps in his mind, because the Cherry Orchard at the National had gone very well for him, and then Peter Hall had offered him this season, and it felt like he was moving into the mainstream of being appreciated, as we all felt he should be, and offered big stages and big budgets and all kinds of things like that. And the Wandering Jew and Country Mania were not popular successes. We played to very small houses, and eventually the National had to let us all go. So it was Mike sank into a very, very depressed place, and it was a time between him and I. It was also very depressing for me. I had great hopes for the whole thing, and that, coupled with the fact that the work he did with me was fundamental to the rest of my career, but it did involve a stripping down and a breaking down of a lot of habits that I had and conceptions I had about acting, which left me often really just a weeping wreck backstage before I would come on stage. I lost all confidence and self-awareness, and in myself, and how what in my own instinct, really. It was a necessary thing to pass through, and maybe I use Saturnine because it happened to be in my first Saturn return, 27, 28, but certainly Hamlet and things that followed, which were more popularly successful for me, came out of that work. And when I returned to the RSC, I demanded certain things from the work that Mike had taught me to go forward. never with the rigor that he's able to do things. He's the most rigorous of people, isn't he, when he applies himself to something?
There's a lot of things I want to pick up first. One of the first things is I think the impression that is sometimes given about Mike's work that it is a free for all, and that But at one point, just a little while ago, you talked about the voice, you talked about the body, and about the fact that Mike is, fanatical about you as an actor being the kind of instrument, not only your imagination, which is absolutely crucial, but being the kind of instrument that can express all these things as fluently and as vividly and with as much colour as you possibly can, which means that you are an athlete in a way. You have to be on song all the time, virtually. I mean, I talked to Sian quite a lot, and she said, the moment when she suddenly, with shared experience, found herself being told by one of the other actresses, just do it full on, every rehearsal, don't hold back. And suddenly she felt that she was flying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important lesson. Took me a long time. No, even in Hamlet, I remember coming into the Hamlet rehearsals after that national season and really being aware for the first time of when actors and actresses were frightened. And I could tell because they were talking about the scene, that rather than playing it, they were asking questions and talking and discussing it. And I thought, no, and I realized I used to do this. I used to feel that the interpretation was the most crucial. You were looking for an original interpretation or a clever interpretation. And I realized, oh no, Mike has really changed that for me, that's not what one's hunting for. One's hunting for the ability to be present. That's all. That the only ideal is to be present. There's no, and actually any interpretation is probably going to create a slight veil between you and the audience. A slight veil of protection perhaps gives you power. You're interpreting for them. You're doing something for them, which is never quite the same, is it, as just being with someone. Even though it may be well intended and loving that you're there to serve them or something like, you're still defining the relationship with a concept in your mind of servant master or master servant or whatever, or great artist sharing or whatever, that it's not just actually being with the audience. And Mike at his essential level, in fact, we had a walk just a few months ago in Hyde Park, and he was he was railing about how he'd never seen any great acting anywhere that matched what he'd seen with a dance company on the television.
The Netherlands Dance Company.
Yes, he's really inspired again in his 80s by this. And why can't we actors be like that, be that viscerally present, Why? He's tormented by the question. And, I had to think afterwards, what if I'd said to him, I'd never, ever, ever experienced anyone who can direct, Mike. Why can't directors direct? Why are they so critical all the time or something like that? I mean, he would have been very ruffled. But that's the thing with him. You have to have a tough skin with Mike. You can if you take it personally, his feelings about the theatre, it's difficult. And so there's an aspect of Mike that very much amplifies my own critical voices when I'm with him. It leads this kind of thought. But the main thing, as Sian was saying, was this thing of playing full on and realizing and just waiting when people would start to talk about a scene. I remember I can see myself looking out the window and just waiting and ticking over and rolling over. What do I want? What do I want? I want to find out, whether she knew that my uncles killed my father. I need to find that out. I'm just thinking very simple things about what's now. But it's proved so useful. It brings to mind the rehearsals of Jerusalem at the Royal Court, which in 5 weeks grew from a 2-act play to a 3-act play, and we added more actors and characters. And even there, I just from the first day, I thought, there's no point hanging around the outside of this. Just got to dive in and play full on even reading at a table, full on, try the accent, do everything, just play, play. And why not? Why not? That's what's fun anyway. So so he was one of the first people to really encourage it. That's a good attitude, um, to play. Let the audience interpret. Let them come up with all kinds of thoughts and whatever they want to do. They paid the money, but our job is to play and be as, yes, as viscerally present, confused, physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, soulfully, all as many different levels as are present in real life. That's what he's really hungry for, and he's not satisfied with anything less than that. Um,
I mean, that thing of directing the audience and telling them what they ought to be thinking is something I was as a young man, I was an actor, and I think it was, if I'd had Mike, I don't think I'd have had a thick enough skin to handle him, and I did.
I didn't. I didn't. Yeah.
I auditioned for him, and I had a week's audition, and I look back on that, and I think, I should have probably given up acting straight away. I gave up acting a couple of years later, but the amount of blocking that I was doing in those auditions, the tiny amount of generosity I ever showed to anybody else, the lack of the ability to open oneself up and as you said, be present. And I was always manipulating, I think, as an adult actor. As a young actor, I wasn't like that, but as an adult actor, I was manipulating everything because that was also our tradition, wasn't it, to a
Yes.
large extent?
Yes. Yes. That's the tradition. Yeah. And that's the temptation. And the stronger you get as an actor, the more experience you get, the easier it is to do that too, to manipulate things. I mean, Michael, to balance this talk about the wild life that he wants to experience in the theater, he also taught me an awful lot about giving and taking focus, which was one of the reasons that I brought him to the Globe, where I realized that we as actors had forgotten, we didn't know how to give and take focus. Actually, Ken Campbell came and said it, yes, actors don't realize how to give focus, but Ken was feeling that they don't know anymore how to take focus orally and visually, because it's all done with the technical lights by the director or with microphones increasingly now too. Controlling it like you control a film or TV, something that's on camera, where of course, I mean, I still think those things are useful things to know on camera, but it's a little futile because the director's going to do what they want to do. You're a different storyteller on camera than you are in the theater. But in the theater, in a shared experience production, or at the Globe, where there isn't any electric lighting or electric amplification, at least in my time, telling the story where the audience where to look, you do at times as a group need to take focus and know that it's really essential for the audience to hear and see this one event. And it may not even be a lead character, maybe a messenger. And so everyone else being still, everyone else being quiet, everyone else focusing their need to know something, like a lighting designer would focus a spotlight on another character with stillness and with not more than that, with imaginative energy. What? Tell us, what is it? That Mike taught me a lot of skills like that, which have been very, very, very helpful. Though I don't know that he wants the actors to be doing that so much, but I certainly feel that you can be present, and you can also be present to the larger event of the story with the audience,
Now that's so interesting because I think one of the criticisms that is made about Mike's work
Uh-huh.
is exactly the opposite of what you're saying. Is that because all of you are so alive
Uh-huh.
all the time on that stage, you don't know where the focus is.
Yeah.
Now, you're saying that you as practitioners have gone further than that, and it isn't just about you being alive, but you being aware of the story that's being told.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I think that was always the case with Mike's work, always the case. One of the things when you came prepared for rehearsals was not only what you said about yourself, what you said about others, what others said about you, but also your plot, the story of your character. Um, and very important, that aspect of not experiencing things before they happen in a story, but being in the right place to the innocent, a certain innocence. I think some of those, I mean, of course, with all of our work, it manifests to greater or lesser degrees, and just as with anything, some of Mike's productions, you know, have not been as successful as other productions. So it may be that those criticisms arose from a time when he wasn't quite, he was trying something experimental that didn't come off, as with the Wandering Jew and Country Mania. Um, but I think some of that criticism comes from critics wanting to be given a easy interpretation. I remember Hugh Cropwell, the director of RADA, having a criticism of Olivier that way, that he felt Olivier came up with one or two great ideas that could be easily written about in half an hour, that he did it quite consciously. And this Hugh Cropwell, who was also a great naturalist in his taste, preferred performances that weren't so defined, easily definable, easily witnessed and celebrated. And I think Mike also is like that. It certainly was an issue between he and I at the National, that he wanted me to be less demonstrative, or I certainly, when I find something that's funny, that when I find the audience is finding something funny and the play's called a comedy, I'm a little less willing to let that thing go, particularly if I feel like if it's before a tragic moment, and relaxing the audiences with humor before you surprise them with something that's very tragic. I get into structural thoughts like that as an actor. And he would challenge me on those kind of things. Philosophically, on the basis of me, meaning that I'm not completely present to what's possible in the collective consciousness of the performance that evening. And then on the other side, I think also that he doesn't always, if I'm to be critical of Mike, he doesn't always follow his tenets himself. What he's asking us to do, he doesn't always do quite himself. He does like to keep control himself of the productions, and he does interpret things and has an interpretation. Now, maybe that's really necessary, that there is one director doing that. There certainly needs to be a center to the wheel, or a hub, which is something that Peter Brook told me when I was trying to work without a director, and something I experienced in companies when you don't have a director, that it's difficult to go around an empty space. It's difficult to circle around that empty space. You need someone to hold the center. And Mike's one of the best people at doing that. But he, yeah, certainly at the National, it felt that there was a little bit of wanting to show all the different techniques that he'd discovered in one season, and that overwhelmed the work, rather than him finding a specific thing that suited the and a specific form that suited those plays. But they were it was a phenomenal experience with many people who I admired and loved. Yeah, it was a phenomenal experience.
So, I mean, I think Mike is very clear-sighted about that National season and the challenges and the problems, and a sort of goes along with what you're saying about wanting to kind of demonstrate everything that he was capable of doing to a certain
I think that was the sadness of it, that I felt he was always against us demonstrating. Of course, any director is against that in any medium. You don't want a demonstration of something. But yes, it was something, like I say, it was the end of a big cycle for him. It was just the classic end of a cycle, like the end of a life, where you have all this stuff around you and you want to kind of let everyone know what you've been up to, you know. And And you know, it was, what was it, a 9-hour first run through in the rehearsal room, at 8 hours, and then the directive came down from Peter Hall that 4 hours had to be cut, and all the detailed work got cut, and it just became a plot. 2.5 hours each half, 5 hours starting at 6 o'clock. I mean, you know, Mike had really lost his connection with an audience at that moment. And so I don't hold it against them at all. People, great creative artists, go through cycles of change, and it was a big cycle of change for him. Um,
Yes,
in the,
I saw both those productions, and the problem is that they it was almost too much to absorb, wasn't there?
oh yeah,
Especially
yeah.
covering Jew.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yet the novel and the whole idea was fantastic, but it should have been over a number of evenings, you know. It should have been constructed as episodes over a number of evenings, and you could come to any episode you wanted to, or to four of them, you know, different episodes with with all the wonderful melodramatic detail of the novel. Um, but yeah, but so there was a matter of that presence of the storytelling. Um, but I think, yeah, yeah, no, it was a very, very important thing to have to be challenged, and have a basic thing changed in my mind, which was, don't aim at a perfect performance, aim at a present performance. Um, why? And Mike still goes on about it. Why do everyone goes on about it? Why do audiences love it when something goes wrong? Why do they all sit up and become, when the scenery falls over or someone forgets their lines or these kind of things? We should be hunting for that. And now at 61, I still feel I'm only just entering the beginnings of that area. Fortunately, my memory is starting to fade a little bit, so I have good hope that I'm going to be better at playing confused on stage. But I do love it when I do love most of all when people really seem confused on stage. You know, all the great stories involve some kind of growth and change, and I don't think that happens unless you pass through at least a gateway, if not a blasted heath of confusion, and not knowing who you are and not knowing what you want. And I think that's so that criticism you asked a few moments ago about Mike's work not telling you where to look and what to look at, I wouldn't share that. It's wonderful in the theatre that we're not controlled in the way that film and TV directors control us.
Yeah.
That we are, you know, we're listening and hearing and watching, and we're in the room with people. That's what I want. I want to be in the same room with the characters in The Seagull, and that's what he did more than anything. And I've gone to other productions of Chekhov in proscenium theatres. I now wouldn't even go to a Chekhov in a proscenium theatre again. Certainly not want to see a film or television thing. I would want to be in a room like the Almeida or some other space where you are with these people and it's rehearsed and played as if they are alive and you're in the room with them.
Mm.
Then it's really, you know, the greatest playwright after Shakespeare, the greatest experiences in the theatre after Shakespeare.
The the fact that Mike had, I think, 3 or 4 years, 3 years at Carnegie Mellon, then he did summer stock, then he ran a theatre in Cincinnati or somewhere. The fact that he was putting on productions of musicals in a week, Hamlet in 2 weeks. You know, he knew what it was like to block people. He knew what it was like to do staging. His training. There's a lovely episode in our talks where he talks about his training, and he said there was a wonderful, very old-fashioned female teacher who would teach you how to walk up stage to open the French windows, how to pour a drink, how to kneel, how to hold your body when you're, you know. Mike knew all that. And that's one of the things that I think is so wonderful, is that, you know, given the fact that he is also a very, very precise human being, if you see what I mean. And he values text as absolutely central to everything that he does. And I mean, he said that, so I'm not. I hope I'm not misquoting him on that. You know, and then he had that section of rehearsal which is he calls logic, where you know it isn't about you just going, oh, I fancy sort of. I don't know what this means, but it doesn't really matter because if I feel you know, he wants you to understand exactly what it is that you're talking about, how you do it, and what your objective is, and all those other things. The precision, given the fact that he could control every single micro moment of your performance, the fact that he doesn't is quite interesting in itself. But let me ask you this, Mark. I've just rambled for a bit there, but let me ask you. I imagine some actors thought, please don't come tonight. Don't give me more notes. Can you just take a couple of nights off and let me just be for a couple of nights? How do you respond to that?
Yeah. It's so unusual to have a director wanting to come as much as Mike wants to come in. I didn't experience him in the early days when he would come every night on tour, and so there was a ferocious kind of creative bubble around people like Dix and Rod Rowie and all those people. It was a very, very intense, constant cooking and preparing and working. I think McBurney is the same with Complicité, very, very connected to his pieces. By the time I was with Mike, he didn't come every night. Maybe he did come pretty much every night at Country Mania. I remember, and at Wandering Jew. In fact, I remember now Country Mania, he went away to do some teaching near the end of the run or something. And yeah, I have to confess, feeling kind of a little liberated. But mostly it was wonderful to have someone pay that much attention, like a conductor, to what was going on. And it was painful. Yeah, he could be very strong with his notes, very, very strong about things. And you can forget that he is on your side and that he loves you and he's cast you and wants you to be your best and everything, because he can be quite demanding. Yeah, so in that way you have to it's a hard thing because he wants you to be completely, of course, present and completely believe in yourself, and yet notes can inflame that belief, and you can start to be playing towards his note or just losing confidence in your own instinct and impulses on stage. So it's always a balance with being able to take strong notes and still maintain your absolute belief in who you are and what you are. Someone like Dan Day-Lewis, you know, said to me, I said, what do you do with, I was commenting about some notes a director gave me on film set, and he said, well, of course, I don't get any of that because I never I am always President Lincoln from the beginning, from months before we begin shooting until the last day. So if they come and give me a note, they have to come and talk to President Lincoln. And so I never come out of character. I never hear the note as Dan Day-Lewis, actor trying to be the best I am. But I hear it as President Lincoln. Would you mind, President, you know, standing here when you say that, or going a little faster? Well, sure, I think I can do that. Yeah, okay, I'll go over there. And that's a very interesting way of approaching it. Actually, I might have used that more with Mike earlier on too. Just been in character the whole time in the rehearsal room. It's certainly a very useful thing on film sets, to enable you to do the kind of things that Mike wants, of being present, and yet also being able to hold in the back of your head somewhere the needs of the director, the needs of the technical crew around you. Yeah, yeah, but no, yeah, he's extraordinarily encouraging when you're outside of a rehearsal room with him. Extraordinarily encouraging, and comes along to things. Doesn't like most stuff, so you know when he doesn't come back that he hasn't really liked it. But in the rehearsal room, very, very strong. A bit like those teachers you remind me of. I had one, Madame Fedro, a Polish dancer, who taught us how to stand up and sit down, how to go to the window, how to hold a glass, all those kind of things for restoration comedy work. Mike sits at the end of the room. I can see him bolt upright and quite inscrutable a lot of the time, watching you carry out different techniques and rehearsals. But yes, it's very, very, very consciously prepared and very, very acutely noted through performances.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my regret with Mike is my own vulnerability and defensiveness. Of course, my vulnerability and sensitivity is something people like about my acting, but it's taken me a while to not to feel defensive or you know that I haven't got room to fail and make mistakes.
But Mark, when you know, we suddenly got into a different situation where you became an employer and you employed Mike to come to the Globe when you were running the Globe,
Yeah,
but you were still actually in the production as well. So you were both employer and actor.
yeah.
Did I mean I'm you know maybe you don't want to go into this, but I'm intrigued by that kind of power relationship then suddenly that you have, where in a way you are the boss. You've employed this director because you respect him, but you're also acting in his production.
Yeah, yeah. I of course that was the case with all the directors I employed at the Globe, and indeed many who I approached who wouldn't come to the Globe because it didn't have the tools that most directors relied on or have become successful with: amplified sound and electric lighting and black box spaces that were black box neutral spaces that had no character of their own that you really had to deal with. But the Globe was the star of the show. There was no actor. You could bring back Olivier, and it wouldn't. There'd be more people there because of the Globe than because of Olivier. So you and it was an unfinished building, the brief was to explore it and to find out how the actors might have originally played those Shakespeare plays. So I had certain requests and needs for the directors, many of whom turned it down and didn't want to come. But really, Mike opened the best period of my time at the Globe, and I don't know why I didn't go to him earlier, really, uh, because he had all the tools we needed in terms of the training of the actors. That the story was all going to be held by the actors, and in a space of shared lighting like the Globe, we were easily comparable with the real audience. Every audience member could see us next to a real person or with a real person behind us. So things had to be that real. We had to get into that sense of breath and connection. We could never tell. Whenever you could always see the audience start to move around when the production was telling a story about the play rather than telling the play itself, telling the story of the play itself. And so Mike was very, very helpful. I don't think with Cymbeline, which was one of the best things we did there, um, I don't think it. I didn't feel like it curtailed his treatment of me. I mean, I was a different person by that time than I had been at 27 when we worked together, and he was a different person too. So I think he was. I think he was just as critical of my posthumous and Clotin, just as many ideas. Perhaps I felt I had a little more license to talk with him about the design ideas. And I remember, yes, we had discussions about he wanted to wall off the back of the Francine. I'd close those. There are three doors, one behind my head, so to speak, and two here. And he wanted to close that off and put the musicians on the ground floor with us. And make a circle, a closed circle. And I was concerned that that closed off some of the depth of the doors, that the doors actually open to a mysterious sounding board and also just a place where the imagination extended scenes. But it was right for Cymbeline. And so we would have those kind of discussions, but I never overruled directors unless it was something I said up front that this needs to be in original practices, which I didn't say to Mike. No, and of course Jenny and Claire were working with him on that too. and then we took it to New York. Yeah, no, he was a very he was a very nice director to work with as an artistic director. You have to understand, this was very, very new for me. I'd never hired directors before in my life, so it was a surprise to learn how directors deal with artistic directors. But Mike was always very, very obviously conscientious and inspired. And we were able to give him the 12 weeks he wanted for rehearsal. And yeah, the rehearsals are hard. You know, they're an endurance. There's an endurance to them. There's long time, long patient building work, building like building a little model that you build over a long period of time. Very, very, very original and different type of way of working, Mike. I don't know anyone who works like he does. I mean, he's inspired people like Ian Rickson, who applies some of his techniques, but has different techniques, but doesn't. No one takes it to such a rigorous degree of demanding that amount of time and spending that time just carefully, gently layering on many different levels. But I hope he felt. Have you asked Mike how he felt on with going with me as an AD?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And no, I mean, I think he loved all of that. And of course, you
Yeah.
also did Midsummer Night's Dream, or did you do bits?
John Ram fell ill at one point, and we didn't have understudies at the Globe. I just stood in myself whenever anyone was off. I just made an apology to the audience and stood in with a book. And so so I stood in one night as bottom
All right.
with a book and played in or maybe two nights played in the production.
But I feel that Mike is not the sort of. There's a lovely bit at the end of his first book called Different Every Night, where he talks about the way in which different directors work with actors. And one always struck me as being very pertinent was that sort of director who will take the leading man or woman or the two stars in the show and have these little private conversations with them to the exclusion of all the rest of the cast, and so you're buttering up, your talent in inverted commas, and sometimes you're then denigrating that acting ASM or that that person who's just doing their first part or whatever it might be. And so you develop this hierarchy. I assisted Mike on one production. You never got the sense that he was kind of, spending a lot of time making somebody who's potentially famous. I don't think Ian McKellen felt that, when he was working with Mike.
No, I don't think so. I think I think he valued people who had worked with him before. In my experience at the National, the actors who had been with him quite a bit, and there were a number of actors like Philip Voss, for example, who'd done a lot of work with him already, and I think he gave them a little bit more leeway than the new people to his technique. He didn't have such a teacher aspect with them. They were co-collaborators with him. Whereas with new people, Mike has a certain pride in the fact that he's doing something new and different than other people. So he likes to teach you and show you, and so that would be the only hierarchy, which is a natural hierarchy. And one would imagine one would get it with Pina Bausch or with McBurney, with any of the strong directors who have a particular way of working. It's an interesting point about different actors having different needs. I know what you're saying about the star system, and certainly Peter Hall once said to me when I challenged him about his rules, that I'd been put off as a young actor about his rules for verse speaking. And he said, well, of course, those rules were only for the company. He said they were things that I learned from Sybil Thorndike and from the great lead actors, but they were only really to lift the company, who weren't as gifted as these lead actors, up to a level where they were matching and supporting the primary protagonists, who had an instinct or a gift or a talent. Someone like Judi Dench, such a natural instinct for speaking Shakespeare, of course, she doesn't need rules and she can create her rules. But someone else just out of drama school has never done Shakespeare is going to need a bit of guidance, or they're going to stand out next to Judi Dench. That was his argument, which was interesting to me. I always prefer love as a guidance towards doing anything well rather than rules. Rules seem to be needed when there isn't proper love. Love will lead you to the right way of speaking Shakespeare. But there's no question that there are certain performers, have always been, who are very, very sensitive, are racehorses, and do need a slightly different way of being treated with than other members of the company. I think what you're mentioning and what Mike was very much against was hierarchical systems where it was because someone was famous rather than that they were particularly sensitive and being asked to do a very particularly sensitive job. You know, playing Cleopatra is very different than playing even Enobarbus or playing Pompey or one of the many other characters that you're going to need to have to tell that story. That person who plays Cleopatra has got to go into some very, very tragic and difficult places of loss every night. And it's not a completely a bad thing if they are held in a particular care by the director, I think. I think that might be a little bit of a shadow perhaps from Mike, that Mike was so appalled by the star system that he saw around him when he was growing up that he jettisoned some understanding that some very great actors are not very logical, are not very ordered, but have that other thing he wants, are very, very present on stage. Some great comedians and tragedians are not necessarily the most intellectual people in the room, in my experience, and might even, God forbid, want to read a newspaper and not pay attention. You have to be careful, don't you, with systems or of excluding people who are difficult, I think. I don't know. It's always an interesting question. We've wandered off point. This isn't so useful for Mike. But generally, yeah, wonderful, wonderful times. And I like the fact that you remind me how funny his work is. I think of The Marriage down at the Lyric Theatre. Did you see The Marriage? Yeah. I mean, not only like the Citizens Theatre original repertoire, plays that you just hadn't seen before, but so funny, and the comical skills of the actors so encouraged and brought out by Mike.
But you used the word way back, and it was the word innocence, and I think at its most, when everything is stripped away, there's this kind of innocence that you in the productions of his that really work, or that worked. And which is, I think, also to do with your idea of people being present, is that somehow you're so open and so naked. And, science fictions, I wish you'd seen it, because, of course, there was Rard being in charge of the ship and kind of looking bewildered because he was meant to be boss, and it fitted perfectly with Rard in so many ways. And Pam as the interpreter. And of course she found, as she said, they all found the sort of clown within them.
Yeah. And he didn't do that, I think. I don't know his work at that time, but I don't get the feeling that he taught that technically. He taught it through innocence and through expectation, because the wonderful work on actions and objectives and the internal needs, trusting the internal needs of the character to manifest in many different ways. That creates marvelous innocence, because you come into scenes with expectations that are not what the scene will be. So you don't just come in empty. You come in, if you have an objective and an action, with an expectation of how it might turn out, and maybe even a couple of different expectations and in life. And so then you're very surprised when it's different than what it is and what it was.
Yeah.
Comedy really, it really only, the laugh, I certainly feel, corresponds to the presence of the performer, and the innocence of the performer. Mike's quite an innocent person, I find, when I'm with him. he has a wonderful child and a wonderful explorative mind, which is good for comedy, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly the Chekhovs were always very funny,
Yeah.
and touching and moving.
Yeah. One of the things, I think we're almost at the end here, but one little thing I want to pick up on is, you said you'd get a laugh for something that you were doing, and then Mike would say, "Yeah, but okay, Mark, now you've got to tomorrow you aren't going to do that again," and John picked that up as Bottom. I mean, Bottom is, the characters the part is a comic part, and it's a wonderfully comic part, and it must be very hard for somebody who has a real comic instinct like you do and like John does, and you go, but that was fantastic what I did today. I found it in the moment, but of course, and then him coming along and saying, yeah, that was fine, but tomorrow you're not going to do that again, are you? And oh no, I mean,
very hard. I share John's. I share exactly John's dilemma with that kind of challenge from Mike, which was even more extreme, I'm told, when in the early days of shared experience. Really, really tough if you repeated anything, different every night, as the title says. I think others may have said this too, that I became aware that different every night could be as dominating a thought form when you were playing as the same every night. Both forms could be quite destructive to being present. That I mustn't. You were presently moving towards something innocent, and you think this note will come in. I mustn't do that. I must find something else, and that would take you out of the present moment to some degree. Yeah. And perhaps also lead you into obscure places that were actually not so much in the mainstream of your plot or your objective or your actions, but into odd things. On the other hand, even the best idea dies. I've been lucky enough to be in long runs of plays. I played Hamlet over 420 times, Rooster Byron in Jerusalem about the same number of times, 8 times a week. Over many, many weeks and months, Boeing on Broadway. And I certainly, I guess what I feel like this teaching from Mike has developed for me is into a spectrum of ways the scene can go, depending very much on where the audience is, that it's not always the same thing, but there's a spectrum of choices that are within the right kind of pace and movement and development of the plot and the whole play at that moment, in my understanding of it. But even inside that spectrum, things can be, all of the babies can be dead. And I certainly can hold on to things that I love well past their life, and they've died. And then you have to make, it just makes the leap bigger. But then when you let go of it, you have to jump further into the unknown. Like jumping into a quarry off a rock cliff, the height just goes up. Every time you hold on to something that's really, you should let go of and try something new, you add another 5 foot to the diving board. And so eventually you're so attached to this, gets a little more fearful. But it's always good to let go and find something else and bring. And what he's really involving is, let go of the form. The form will follow the force within, and don't be frightened of confusion, and creating with an audience rather than serving them something, even though it's very tasty, that you prepared before. It's an ongoing challenge. I remember at the time that we were doing Wandering Jew, Mike, Miles Davis came and played at the Queen Elizabeth Hall, and a couple of us went over, and I was very surprised at the beginning of the concert that Miles came out with his back to us, and the band was facing us, and he was slightly to the side, but with his back to us. He'd occasionally turn a little bit on profile, and when he had a solo, but primarily he played facing the band. And then after a while, the music was so wonderful, and I realized, of course, he's not come to perform music, he's come to make music. And we're being invited to be present as if we were in his home or his recording studio or in a club where they're just they're just making music. They're just creating things and finding out what's going on. And he acknowledges this a little bit, but he's not going to perform prepared things. He's going to cook in front of us, with us, and try and cook our presence into the music that evening. And that became a much more positive way for me thinking about it. To really, really connect before performance with the audience, that they're doing the creative work and they have all the innocent energy, more than enough, that you need if you really let them into the performance. Don't try and overwhelm them with the performance, but really play with them, not to or for at them. And Mike's work was very helpful in helping me to try and make that a present part of my performances on screen as well as actually on stage. The thing of actually not trying to lock out all the technicians, but just swallowing all the energy in the room and into your reality, and making it a part of your reality. Mike was very helpful with all those kind of things. Yeah.
So, do you feel that you take some of what you've done with Mike into your screen work then?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do
Yeah.
you do stuff like saying, okay, well, what is my objective in this scene?
Absolutely. And even with what's nice with the young directors that I'm starting to work with more now, um, I can offer them, things to ways of directing, because most film directors know nothing about acting. Very few, even the great ones, know very little about how to note actors, and don't know how to make the use of a few takes. So I was able to share points of concentration, one of Mike's techniques, with a young director, and then saying, this is a very good thing to, before a take, if once you've got what you want from me, then give me a take about a point of concentration. Say the scene has something to do with my mother, and my mother's not well. You can say, I'd like you to focus on your mother in this take and increase your concern about her from, say, level 4 or 3 that you've been playing to 9. That you are acting your objective in the scene, your action, but you are primarily concerned with your mother, and see how that affects the scene. I'd like you to concentrate on what don't you know, what's a surprise in this scene, or just give them points of concentration that they can give to me, which will bring out something different. And in the editing room, they'll have a variety of different versions of the scene to use. Certainly faster would be very good, and certainly something more magnetic or electric or different dynamics. I think Mike's work could be very, very useful for film directors to get the most out of a few takes and have more options in the editing room than just the one aiming at a perfect version of a scene, which is really, as devastating as any puritanical or Protestant form of thinking, of there being one clean way. That's not the case. It's not the right thing. So yes, playfulness, presence, can obviously all the work he does on the way you connect, all the Meissner type work he does on how you connect with the other players, the physical center, all the work on the different dynamics of movement that he does. I'll use all of those for different characters and be able to maintain dialects or maintain certain types of movements or energies. All of that work came from working with Mike. And more than anything, I guess, knowing that regular little bits of work on something, and it will be there, to trust that if you turn up and practice regularly on something, and then it will be there when you need it. Yeah, all those, even the giving and taking of focus stuff that we worked on for the Wandering Jew, very, very, very good. Yeah, that was right. That's right. I'm remembering now with Country Mania. See, he had an interpretation of Country Mania that he wanted it to have more of a Chekhovian kind of melancholia or sadness, not just be funny. And that's a very interesting point. Does a director need to have set an interpretation like that? I felt he was asking us not to interpret our parts, just to play them. But then he was uh, allowing himself to interpret it rather than to let it emerge as what it was with that particularly
Mm.
quite comedic group of actors that we had for those plays.
Mm.
So I think he, I think the way to say this is that Mike's work is not just something he challenges other people with, but he challenges himself with it as well. And he's developed those things because he faces some of the same challenges that he brings out of, he makes us aware of as actors. Yes.
Mm.
Not that it's a failure in Mike at all, but that his work arises from a very, very personal place, very, very personal. And he's just rigorous in trying to tackle those things and figure out the tools and the ways to loosen stuff up or tighten stuff or whatever needs to be done.
Well, I mean, Mark, you know, when I talk to Mike, I don't think I'm going to edit this bit, but when I talk to Mike, and he's an 87-year-old, and he's still working 4 days a week, and he's
Yeah,
still passionate about the work that he does, and he's
yeah,
still interested
yeah.
in what it is to be an actor. Because actually, in a strange way, what I've gathered from all these interviews is that, you know, he admires actors, and he thinks
Um,
that actors are, you know, should be. That's the thing. The idealism. Actors should be the great communicators in the world
yeah, yeah.
because they tell us about how flexible and empathic we can be as human beings.
Well, they do more, of course. They give us a shared experience of those things. We're in the room with people going through things that would be perhaps even in some cases mortally dangerous for us to experience in life. And so it is the greatest mystery school. The Eleusinians and the classics used it to train young people. Armies still do it, and doctors and policemen still do it. They hire actors in to act patients or act angry people who've been arrested or act combatants in imaginary things. And everyone knows that's the way you prepare and train people for very difficult experiences. And so it's yes, it's that role of actually imaginatively experiencing something within the safe space of a theater that is incredibly useful for people in life, not only just in breeding compassion and understanding, but actually preparing people for when, if they find themselves in a situation like that, they can remember they've had this experience before.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so many letters and different. I think immediately of a family who came to the Globe to Julius Caesar, a wife and father, and the boy. And the boy had been held at knife point in a shopping center a couple of weeks before, a month before, and the family had not grieved about it. They hadn't. It had been so frightening to them, his kidnapping and being held at knife point for a few hours. But when they experienced the killing of Caesar, she wrote to him and said all three of them, they just started to weep and cry, and these experiences were cathartically released for them. So there's that aspect of it too. And I feel I feel I feel Mike more than any other director I've worked with is always hunting for that primary, really powerful experience. Whereas a lot of directors are hunting for an intellectual um, thing, which is very wonderful and diamond-like and crystal-like. But Mike's really, really wanting something
Mm.
very raw and visceral and experiential. And as you rightly say, he has the highest and deepest and widest hopes for the acting profession, and the highest, widest, deepest love for the potential that he has experienced as an audience member, and that he often grieves and longs for when he comes to the theatre, and when he makes theatre too. Uh, he's very, very demanding for that essential thing. So he's a north star. He's a touchstone, a lodestone in my time in the theatre. Uh, yeah, absolutely. Really sets a very, very wonderful objective to and hope for our work as actors. Mm. Mm.
Mark, we're going to bring this to a close.
Yeah, yeah.
Unless you got anything, that was great. Do you want to
Yeah.
say anything else? Have you got more to say? I don't want to bring it to a close if you want to carry on.
Yeah, it's just let me think for a moment. Yeah, no, for me, he really is the great storyteller of my age. I've learned things from many people, many wonderful teachers, but he stands head and shoulders above them for me. And all my work in the theatre and in front of camera, I just would not be the same without his wonderful teaching and encouragement, as well as criticism of what I've done and things I've been part of. Yeah, yeah, it's really fundamental influence on my love of theatre. And yeah, it'd be impossible to express my gratitude to the level. That's why I've been thinking for a little bit how to do that, but it's just impossible really, to say what I've said. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, Peter.
that's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Do you want to come back with the edit of this, or what? How
Would you
are you?
like me to? I'll stop recording now, okay? I'm
Okay.
stopping. I think we had a decent ending there. I had to do an awful lot of teaching Mike how to end something because as soon as we, as soon as we, as soon as we sort of, I said, okay, we're about to stop now, and then he'd have some other. Oh shit! Hold on, I'm crap at this. Hold on, I don't want to record. I don't want to record. I want to stop recording. Damn it! I think I've blown this. Sorry about this. I won't be long.
Don't worry.
Yes, so it was always very funny because I'd say, okay, thanks a lot, Mike, and then he'd go, and you know, so we've never got a decent ending to any of our videos. And you know, sometimes early on, he was very forbidding. You know, that forbidding quality that you mentioned. You know, at the end of the rehearsal room, you know, with this straight back and this serious face. And, you know, if he was not in a great mood, you know, it would be, oh boy, it would be tough. And then this innocence, which is what I think I've always loved about Mike, is, you know, from me as a young man like you know, seeing these productions and then meeting him, and he was an immensely serious human being, but then he would have this sort of Zen-like guru, no, what do I mean? He's sort of laughing Buddha quality about him,
Yes, yes.
which was just so endearing, and he still has it, you know, and there's moments in our videos when we start laughing
Yeah.
and we kind of can't stop. And you know, and he's kind of doing this with his bald head, and he's kind of thing. So I think the what's been interesting for me is the admiration has been there all my life. You know, as a young man, as a young actor, and then, you know, as a writer. And he always was brilliant with my writing. He doesn't suffer fools gladly. You know, so he likes what I write, but you know, he will. Sometimes it will be a bit like you. You'd think, oh God, oh, that is tough. What you've just said. It's really hard.
Have you stopped the recording now?
Yeah, I hope so. Oh no! Wait! None of this will happen. Why can't I stop it? I've got to stop it somehow.
I'm happy for you to keep going. You're making me think about the things while you speak. Yeah, but yes, so you understand the sharpness of his criticisms.
We didn't go into any detail here, Mark, about, you know, you crying at the National as a young actor, you kind of feeling that your confidence had been battered. That's really tough. I mean, that must have been a really tough thing for you. Did you think of yourself as This is a weird question because you're an immensely successful actor now. Did you think of yourself as a really good actor in those early days as well?
Um, I was always a bit more focused on criticisms of myself, but I was aware that I was successful. I was aware that I was being uh, celebrated at times at the RSC and getting work. Um, but 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 actually, yes, I'd come through a bad period just before that. Um, Bad period in film, very unhappy in film. Yes, and the cooperative theatre company that I began collapsed, didn't work. Relationships were in a tangle. Um, this is a I won't repeat this story because it's many other places, but I was offered a part by Spielberg in a film and accepted it the day that Mike offered me the national uh, company job. And only Sean, who I'd lived with for 4 years earlier on in my life, had been cast so far, so it was going to be both of us, and I loved Sean's work. Um, and I had 4 hours to decide whether to do the Spielberg film or to do Mike's season. And I went to the I Ching, and the I Ching said to me that if I did the theatre season, I would be led towards community. And I realized, that's a really essential, that's more important than money or fame or success. Was I came into this business as a very shy, lonely little kid for community. And that's what Mike will offer me, and that's why I took it. And on the first day, I met my wife Claire, and had an intense experience of community on those shows. But yes, it did conclude with me thinking I'm not a good actor at all, and having terrible trouble having the confidence to go on stage, and having such heightened critical voices that I needed to help from a psychiatrist who said to me, look, it's very good you have a coach, which Mike had certainly heightened in your head. And that coach is trying to get you to be better, like a tennis player who takes on a coach at a certain point in their career to improve. But the coach was shouting in my head during performance, oh, shit, oh, fucking terrible. Stop that. Go forward and apologize to the audience. Ask if you can forgive again, that kind of thing. And psychiatrist said, what if you heard someone standing in the wing saying that to a fellow actor? What would you do? And I said, I'd go and hit them or tell them to shut up and leave the person alone. And that's how bad it had got for me. So the psychiatrist was helpful in saying, look, have a conversation with your coach and tell the coach to wait in the dressing room. You'd like to talk with them in the interval or at the end of the performance very much, but not during play. Not during play. Coaches are not allowed on the tennis court or on the pitch. They have to stand at the side. And so Mike had developed such a strong critical voice in my head that I was kind of incapable of acting for 6 months or so, from the end of that forward. And then I emerged really new from that death experience with new objectives and new things to learn. Yeah. So there was a definite breaking down.
Were you alone in that, or were there other actors who experienced the same kind of crises during that time, do you think?
I think there were other actors who experienced a similar crisis, and I think Mike experienced an even greater crisis than any of us, in terms of his trust of his own instincts too. He was going through it even more, so we were all being affected by that um, experience. Very, very profound and rich, platonic, saturnine, death of old forms experience. Yeah, but not necessary, and the gift didn't feel like a gift at the time. It felt like I was really possibly done and finished as an actor, but it was actually the beginning. Yeah. I was just want to say, that there's a specific thing about why I love his work so much, and there were a number of moments like this in The Seagull. Right away comes to my mind a very long pause. There's a pause written into the text, but with Mike, it went like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes in my memory. Probably wasn't that long, but it was long. And I was able to look. There were about 8 or 10 actors on stage, and I had time to really look at each of them And each of them, I can remember it now, each of them was going through, as if they were speaking a monologue, a whole range of different things they were playing with and on their own and with other people, potential things to say that they didn't say. It was so exciting. And I remember that even then with the new play, what I did in my summer holidays, I remember particularly if a play had a moment of sudden revelation or sudden conflict, no one would do that as well as Mike. It would take your breath away sometimes. What would happen between actors on stage, and it helped me to focus on that. Really, that nothing happens on its own. It's why awards were very difficult for me for a long time, because they seemed to be celebrating completely the wrong thing. That everything really wonderful happens between two players, or indeed if there's only one actor on the stage, then between that actor and the audience. So it's actually always between three, a trinity between the two players and the audience. It's when those three are aligned or a group or whatever, that those are the moments, and no award ceremony celebrates those things. The best scenes, the best monologue or duologue, or the best moments of comedy or tragedy, or I always knew I would get something like that. It didn't always happen. Of course, sometimes the evening wasn't there, as Rod Rowie would say, that was a good evening. But my God, when it was there, it would just take my breath away, that feeling of being privileged to be at something so intimate, be part of something so intimate. I think it's really what is very most satisfying about the theatre, when people long for it, and you don't really get it in the same way at a film or television performance.
But do you, I mean, one of the things that I am so aware of when I think back to me as a young actor is this veil that I had over me, so that I wasn't really allowing myself to see somebody else in, to really see and be responsive to somebody else, because that was so dangerous, I think. And that's true of our lives. I mean, I was saying to Sally the other day that I used to have a weird phenomenon as an adolescent where, and it used to upset me so much I stopped it, is where I would see somebody's face melt and I'd see their real face.
Oh, yeah.
And it was terribly disturbing, because I didn't want to see their real face, because that meant that you had responsibility for that person in a strange way. And, we see that in other people. We look at them and we see the vulnerability, the pain, the anxiety in their eyes, or whatever it might be. And quite often we just don't want to have to engage with that. And it must be the same as an actor. And I mean, I think probably I have had those experiences, but they take an awful lot of kind of courage to just go, I am accepting you in the scene with me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not controlling you, and I'm not controlling me either.
Yeah. I think he, and that's one of the reasons I think he wanted to take total control himself. He wanted everyone else not to be controlled. He would control it, and very against you talking to other actors, even as a fellow actor, about the scene or about what each of you were doing, working things out. He didn't like that at all. Throw your faith in him, and he would hold you. There's a certain a certain guru aspect to Mike. Bless him.
Sean tells, I've interviewed Sean, and
Yeah.
Sean tells an amazing story about how you were doing something at the Royal Court.
Yeah, bloody poetry.
And the director went out. And you just thought, well, what am I going to do? He had a phone call to make or something. And you just went through the scene together. And apparently he came back and he was absolutely horrified, because you had just kind of thrown the scene up into the air and were not doing, dare I say it, what he had kind of...
Well, yeah, I went from Mike right into Max Stafford Clark, bless him, who was all actions, and describing everything before you got up. So for 2 weeks, you'd sit around a table and put a verb a transitive verb to every line you had, every action. I probe you, I push you, I pull you, all kinds of different, you had to describe everything literally. And partly I'm an actor because I don't have verbs. I don't have that as wide literary ability to describe my emotions as I have to play things. It's like asking a footballer to define exactly what every pass and every shot and every move is before he or she does it. And so that was particularly debilitating for Sean and I, who'd come out of the Mike Alfred season. And though Mike is a controller himself, he's not controlling in quite that same way. So yes, I remember that day, but it was quite difficult working with Max, who was a very serious and wonderful director, made a lot of wonderful productions, absolutely. But for me, I prefer to get up and play in chaos rather than define it all and then fit it to that defined plan.
Yeah, I mean, Mike's got a fascinating little section. He talks about actions because, we've all kind of learnt from him and from Max Stafford Clark and all these people when I've done teaching and directing.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, no, I mean, I'm not kind of rigid about this because, I, or you don't have to actually come up with, or you don't have to find that precise
No,
word.
that's right. That's right. I mean, both of them, Max and Mike, of course, were pushing against a non-specific relationship to the text,
Yeah.
and also playing of states, emotional states, rather than playing needs and actions. Um, so they both were really encouraging a connection between us as actors, and defined beautifully subtle and shaped connections. That was their objective. So it was a good objective that they had, and just different tools. I just think actions are a very good tool when something's stuck and gone dead, but not necessarily a blanket. I think systems in performance are just as dangerous as systems in directing, that you have to be careful about systems. Everything's changing all the time. Anyway, we probably have dredged out of me the best I can do in my celebration of Mike. Uh,
Oh, it's been wonderful. I don't know whether I should get you to act the beginning of a second half of this because I don't know I don't know if I've been recording. Number one, and also it does say I'm recording, and number two, I don't know how long we've talked for, but I'll just do some editing. I'll work it out.
okay, yeah, and certainly, by all means, too. Yeah, 11:45. Are we talking nearly for 2 hours? Wow. That's okay. But certainly come back to me. If there's something that you haven't got, don't worry at all. Come back to me and say, I'd like to talk a little bit more about this or clarify this. You said this, but in a rather long-winded way. Could we do this more tightly? Or I'm very happy for you to
Bless
come
you.
back.
Thank you, Mark. It's been wonderful. I mean, it's always inevitably scary to be talking to somebody like you or Ian McKellen. But what's been so lovely is that you're just so nice. You're just really nice people, and so you make it kind of very easy for me, which is fantastic.
I think Ian and I both love Mike very much, so it's easy to be nice when
I
you can.
said, have you got anything critical to say? And he said, don't think so. He said one wonderful thing, though. He said a lot of wonderful things, but he said something about playing Hamlet, because he was about to play Hamlet. And he said, there are these directors who will go, it's got to be all purple. And he said, the purple might be great for that line or for that moment or that scene, but not for the whole play.
Yeah.
And he was quite interestingly, he said Mike's a plodder, but he didn't mean that in a kind of cruel. He didn't mean that in a negative way.
Yeah.
And it's what you said, layer after layer after layer after layer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much, Mark.
Good. Lots of love. Talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I'll bring this to an end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, Peter.
Bye. Bye. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.